Hello, this is Peter Colla with Spiritual Therapies with Peter and Colla. You may have seen me before on Charlie Ward, Nicholas Van Yemen, Nino Rodriguez, and a gambit of other truthers that report the truths in this end times war that we happen to be living in. If you've probably seen some of my videos or read my books or my blogs, you see that I write and speak primarily about healthcare and putting God back into the healthcare situation, the treatment and the evaluation thereof, and how we can eliminate pharmaceuticals and go back to the natural way of healing that was intended for us. And in the process, ascend. But that's not what I'm here to talk to you about today. And if the camera shakes, it's because I have this little kitten that keeps jumping on my lap. I'm here to talk to you about my new book that I've launched today called Hunting Fields. It's based on the real events that happened 30 years ago on 11/11 of 1992, when my first wife, on her way to deliver our second child, the day before the delivery, going to see her doctor, was in a tragic car accident, and she and the child died. Or that was what I was told for 30 years. As we go through this ascension process in the end times, and we start asking for truths, don't be surprised if some of the things that you were told in the past may be revealed as a lie. And you find out that you've been lied to, not only by the police, the judges, the hospital, but by your friends and family. As I started uncovering after 30 years that I had been lied to about this accident, evidence just miraculously came before me. Falsified documents, unreported events, no documentations whatsoever of the death, etc. I started putting together all these pieces that didn't make sense. And like I do with my medical examination, treatment, and writing, when I come across something I don't know what to do or treat or how to treat, I go to God and I ask. You said, God, I have not because I asked not, so I'm asking. What happened? He showed me in the case of all these individuals that were involved. So I wrote it down. Hunting Fields is the story based on visions that I had of the events that happened not only to my deceased wife, but to her born child, and what the child had to endure later. You get to read, and it will be read to you because I'm going to have it narrated, and this entire book is going to be narrated and read chapter by chapter until it's completely exhausted. You get to see it from not from the eyes of the superhero who goes in and finds out that their children have been hiding in these or been hidden in these caves and these cages, or people have been taken and are raped or whatever, MK altered. But you see it through the eyes of the individuals because God allowed me to see it through their eyes, through the eyes of the hunted, through the eyes of the caged, through the eyes of the MK altered, through the eyes of them that do it. And I wrote it down. I wanted truth in the healthcare industry, and I found to the contrary, and I exposed that. And over time, it cost me. I wasn't able to practice any longer, but I keep practicing. I just treat people for free. I wrote this because, as my mentor said, it's our job to expose. It's God's job to dispose. This book, Hunting Fields, exposes the people behind the systematic hunting of us, not over in Haiti, not in some third world country, but right here in America under our noses. Like many of my other books, they're available. I'm a self-publisher. It's available on Amazon. I released it on 11/11 today. Obviously, the printable version, you don't get it for a few days. I think it's going to take, the earliest you can get is like the 22nd, but you can get the Kindle version. Because this is the 11th of November, it is the anniversary of the death 30 years ago of my first wife. That I know for sure. The tragedy, but not forgotten. I am not releasing this information to make money. I'm releasing this information to expose. I will, after a course of period, I will be doing every day a couple of chapters a day. I'm going to have one of the characters of the book actually read the book on video that he's graciously agreed to do. And then when it's completed, I will be publishing on my website a PDF copy for anybody who wants can have it. It's available at Amazon. I will be trying to get a hard copy version. And if you share this book with 20, 25 people and you let me know and they get it, download it, buy it, whatever, you write me and tell me this and show me this, I will send you a signed copy to you personally, because that makes you one of the warriors in this end time war as you pass this message on to others. We are not safe here. Well, we will be when Donald Trump comes back. When we finally put an end to this secret society, secret handshake, adrenochrome drinking bastards. And that's what this book's about. So, without further ado, please enjoy. Always, you can reach me at posture.is.everything@gmail.com. Bless you. That's Spiritual Therapies with Peter Colla. I'm Dr. Peter. Goodbye. Hello. I am the hooded vigilante. That's what they call me. Some people call me that. Some people just call me a pain in the ass, I guess. But anyways, Dr. Peter Colla asked me to come and read this because I do show up in his book, Hunting Fields. So I agreed that I would read this. I'll read you today the prologue, chapter 1 and chapter 2. Please bear with me if I stumble sometimes through the words. I'm not the most literate. Prologue. I've heard it is said, God giveth and God taketh away. One man's voice says to another as they walk in the dark. It seems to me to be a very perplexing statement, as when I feel God only could be good. Yet the thought that any time he might just arbitrarily decide to take away another of the most beautiful things he's ever given a person in this life, well, that seems to me a bit cruel. Images flash in the bright light of the two people holding up a child giggling, turning slowly through the grass and flowered speckled fields as they playfully seem to dance through life. The rays flash through the clouds as the couple pirouette the laughing child. Her sounds fill the sky with rainbow waves as they dance across the flowers of our minds. A flash. A car drives, a woman talks to her child in the back seat as the car hurries and plays music. The image is blurred by time and space as the edges of the vision play subtly as a wet rag to my face. A small voice is heard in the distant, playfully singing in the back seat. I think I'll bring you to Aunt Marion's, a woman says. Would you like that? The voice sings through the flashes of image and dreams a cluster of thoughts as willow flutters through the lakes or waterside streams. A thought subtly comes to my mind. I was married once, wasn't I? That was the question posed to me from the lips of someone now gliding next to me, a woman who knows the answer and merely asking because of the perplexing idea that I could possibly not remember it only being 2 or 3 moments ago when she died. The car door closes and the car starts as the sound of music plays through the humming of sweet sounds, voices. No, a voice I think I remember as she sings along with the sounds. What a sweet memory. What a fond purpose. What a loving rejoice. The voice says, as the images shift from the road for a moment to the extended belly in front of her wheel. A hand softly caresses the image, goes back to the bright wheel glass of the car. The rainbows of colors stream through the kaleidoscope or jeweled revealed. Everything's going to be all right, I hear her say softly. Is this a dream or a memory? Sometimes it's hard distinguishing between them, especially when life seems more like a dream. And then the desire to spend more time asleep outweighs the passion for life. Yet so have the days become. The image suddenly gets darker, gray, browns blurred by shadows of dark crimson and black. In the distance, I hear a great engine start, a rev of a couple times. There's no coming back. And then, with the squealing tires and the sound approaching like the charging black bull of some long-forgotten scene, no matador this time, only a child in its wake, the engine's cruel and unforgiving, it would seem, bound on the merciless destruction, cold gray steel, an innocent soul it will take. A face encircled with pure white light, she turns. Everything's going to be all right. I remember saying, or was it her saying it to me? Are you sure I can drive? I say one last time. Again, and only the faintest sounds of a song playing over the radio, ABBA, Chiquitita, and then it's black. A screeching sound, a long, long screech, not all that different than the braking car or some predatory bird off in the distance. I think that's her voice screaming as well. And then sham, an instant black, only leaving the whistling sound in my ears. No mercy, only hell. As she softly says with a voice as similar or familiar as my own, it is time to wake up, Peter. Wake up. Are you okay? I hear someone say. The fog of the fishbowl that is around my head seems to be talking. The sound cuts through the haze of the siren's call, through the fog of a stormy coast-filled night. The only real sound is the rumbling of the deep demonic voices, screeching with its buzzing in the ears like the hull of a ship sliding across the perilous rocks and crashing waves. There's been an accident, I said, hearing the echoing of my own voice. She's gone. A flash, did I say? Or did someone say it to me? Dark again, blacks and grays, or is it browns? It's so hard to say. I'm okay, I said to him, with the I'm okay word still ringing through the room like a deep vibration of a bell. Surprisingly so, but in my mind, I shouldn't be. I can remember my mind even going at the moment back to the moments days before riding in the car with her. Is it a dream? A nightmare? I pray so. The image fades to dark. This has to be a dream. If it is, then why do I feel so much pain? Is this what it feels like to have half your body ripped off? No, I don't pray, I scream. Chapter 1, The Hunted. Hunter or hunted? Are there really any differences in the quality of energy flowing in the single body of a day? The murky canopy of Schwarzwald, the dark forest, is particularly dark even in the light of day, especially as the sun sinks towards the horizon, leaving only the illumination of clouds high in the sky above the thick canopy of trees that blankets the forest below like a shroud of a long forgotten fallen friend. High above the canopy of trees in the bright light of the late afternoon day, a dove flies, sailing majestically as it flaps its wings and glides, a direction of its own choosing, yet flying with purpose, and that is to live each of its days, these gifts that are given, beauty and harmony, the breezes with its wind whispering dances across its body with each gliding flutter of its wings. Off in the distance, thunderings are heard, flashes just on the edge of the horizon, pushing the bird to new hesitations. Not a storm like any it has ever experienced in its life, but one most assured, approaching and malevolent. For while the sky is clear, a sense of something looming lies just out of earshot. It is not as much something palatable as it is just a feeling. Suddenly the bird senses the eyes of something on it. It turns its head in flight, trying to spot it for itself, the physical image tied to the feeling it already feels behind, frantically sensing in its spirit darkness looming above, but also below as it ponders the descent into the dark spaces between the thick trees beneath. Something, a darkened sound from above, no, far below, and the dove turns just a moment before the raptor bird of prey, a merlin, strikes past, missing the main target of the lower, weaker white and blue dove, yet slicing across its back with talons, dislodging a spray of feathers, skin, and blood. The dove dives, but also tumbles in a sudden ball of flailing feathers as the merlin screeches in frustration, passing rapidly in its now powerful circling strike. The barrier or thick tree branches and leaves quickly approaches the tumbling bird as it looks almost as solid as the ground in its light. Perhaps it's the audible being in the foothills of the Alps or the latitude with its own cold, snow-filled climate of winters that keeps the underbrush sparse, limited to the thick thorn bush-like patches that seem to wall the open yet dark expanses below the thick canopy of the trees, a dwelling place of all sorts of malevolence, from which its name, the Black Forest, originates, and this particular forest seems to create. The falling, flailing dove manages only to regain its lift for just a split second before crashing through the canopy of the trees branches below. The merlin had already turned for another strike, but passes over as the bird tangles again, crashing now through the breaking branches and thick tree leaves, snapping and thumping sounds as the fallen bird hits the upper branches with speed, much louder than the bird of its size could expect to live through. The wall below that form between the sentinel trees, their thick shrubs such as raspberries, brennettles, stinging needles, brush oak, is so thick animals have a hard time passing below, leaving no chance for larger fleeting animals to pass or find shelter once they have begun their own frantic escape from predators who seem to know these key passages in and out the gauntlets of death. This combination of tall, stoic trees and broad interlocked brindle bushes, which form barriers, creates an almost maze-like effect throughout the entire forest, which spans hundreds, if not more than 1,000 square kilometers. The ground can be seen almost the waters of the reflection of a small, murky pool that is accumulated on the deserted wagon path deep in the dark of the forest floor. In the quiet stillness of the dusk ground below, a dove's body suddenly hits the ground with an almost unnoticeable thud, just as the frustrated screech of the merlin far above can be heard in the distance. A single plume feather softly glides down and comes to rest on the surface water, barely sending a ripple across as it lands its last breath of flight and life, coming finally to rest. The almost eerie stillness is only broken by the echoing sound of a menacing horn in the distance, and then the occasional screeching of some far-off animal echoing its cry across the mosses and dark rotted leaves and the dry discarded wood that carpet the ground of this now darkening expanse. Soft echoes and crickets soften. Sounds seem to dance across and around the wisps of fog that collect across the edges of the vision, carrying their own voices, some merely rustling of bushes and others frightened animals plunging blindly into their entangled branches, themselves in pain and bondage like the falling flies into a dark and great spider's web. The sound seems to touch the skin in cold, shrilling fingers as all that pass through the forest, carrying with them the telltale accounts of their journeys across the surfaces of the misty waters that sits on the surface of the dark, damp grounds. Their only passage marked by the small waves of sound produces across the black waters of the puddles. These waters seem to collect along what looks like the forgotten paths, even the wagon roads lost in some now dark shadow of moss, occasional yellow-brown speckled mushrooms and mud. The only sign of life that actually exists is the aged and dead leaves that have fallen from the canopy, creating only a dark, murky carpet that seems to add to the doom and gloom of the resting heavily on the surface of the forest. The long, dark puddle rests in the middle of the age weather-worn and forgotten path that winds its way through the now darkening forest, sitting deep in the shadows. Shrouded light from the sky's reflection off the surface of the water presents an image, a makeshift hole in the dark forest floor, perhaps a gateway to another world below. Yet even this has already turned too dark to reflect any significant light, so far below the safety of the branches above. The puddle is black, yet with every echoing sound, the distant crickets chirping ripples and other echoing sounds form across the surface, reflecting light as they dance across the waters, giving their own translations of the sounds they repeat now as light. The sounds dance across the surface in a shimmer of lights and darks, an almost fairy-like battle between good and evil. The ripples suddenly fade, and so do the sound. Even the crickets have silenced, as if by some dark symphony conductor has suddenly held up his wand, for all life is not resting, but on edge. Every living creature in the forest is silent, watching, listening to what resides hidden in darkness. Splash! A naked woman's foot suddenly breaks the silence with its explosion of water and shimmering light as it painfully sprints along the dark, forgotten trail of the forest floor. The gasping, naked young woman is frantically running along on what appears to be a shadowy path she found past the walls of thick bushes. As she looks desperately from side to side in the dark, searching for the escape she can only fear eludes her. Her naked body is lacerated by countless thorns and unyielding dry branches as they each reach out and out of the dark to grab her passing, bleeding, gray, dim lit and mud-covered pink skin. She glances over her shoulder as she runs, unable to see anything in the dark gloom of the fog that is settled below the canopy of the massive trees. Tripping on rocks or debris in the grasses that surround her, she tries to see through the flood of the dark. In her own blurring eyes, cries to catch a glimpse of where she's running to. Only moments before she woke, her head was spinning with flashes of memories, hardly remembering her own name, Esther. The sound of her name almost appearing in the winds blowing past her face. A burst of noise as the realization she's in a cage and it is opened. She is suddenly being pulled out by her hair and out onto the floor of the cage by a large hooded silent man. Perhaps she is still sleeping, dreaming this horror of a nightmare as she found herself being shaken awake, naked, being pulled savagely out of the cage, waiting desperately for the dream to fade, replaced by the safe comfort of her bed. Yet, not this time. For the pain she clearly feels is real, and unlike the usual painless nightmares she has experienced in the past. Others around her, all naked, whimpering, some other young women, mostly young children, mainly many of them of the smaller ones, 2 or 3, one in the cage, others together, tied together. The truck suddenly slows. She's held face down by her hair. She glimpses a few of them in the eyes as they watch in horror what's occurring to her. The truck suddenly jolts to a brief stop as she's tossed with force onto the ground behind the now departing truck. She instinctively knows she needs to run. She staggers for a moment as her head clears and her steps become entangled. The dark path before coming into vision, winding down what looks like a long, thin meadow, turning into a dark mist that awaits, not unlike the vast maw of some dark, giant beast. The only sounds now her stumbling movements, a few fading vehicle sounds in the completely still forest, with the exception of her gasping and coughing breath, with its own occasional whimper of pain and fear, leave no doubt she is fleeing for her life. Hardly watching where she's going, almost unable to pull her eyes from behind, she keeps stumbling forward into the darkness. She just instinctively knows she must keep on, as silent as possible, and run away from the direction the truck has just departed from. Suddenly there is an echoing long sound of a deep horn not far off in the distance behind her. It fills her heart and every muscle of her body with terror, followed by its own screeching laughter of demons who are on the hunt, on their thundering, galloping horses, pounding the hard ground like some chaotic drum. This only puts the young woman into more of a panic as she stumbles off the path onto the short grasses and rocks, quickly crossing what appears to be a small meadow of high grass. She tries to climb and jump from rock to rock. She desperately tries to find some refuge in the tangle of thorns and shrubs. The closer she comes to the edge of the bushes, the clearer it becomes that a wall of branches and thorns is impassable. Wait, what's that? She says to herself, a small, dark opening just around one of the thick brindle needle bushes. She has had more than once, and occasionally touched when she was of her youth, and then regretted. Its pinned and poisonous needles burn to the touch, the wall of the thorn bushes, dried, unyielding branches becoming more clear in her dark view. As she gets closer, she sees something, almost a cave, around the corner of the bushes, only visible as she looks behind the bushes right in front of her. She painfully pushes past the needles, biting her lip not to make a sound, pushing through the thick leaves to crawl into the dark crevice. An ancient fallen tree, a giant from an almost buried beneath the canopy of vines, she sees in the dark shadows, lit on the other side with what appears to be a hollow tunnel through the trunk that lays there. Desperately, she crawls deeper inside and lays still, peering back around the edge of the dark black wood as one of the horseback demons suddenly jumps and rides through the fog and shroud behind. In the distance, she hears other children desperately screaming in terror as she knows many of the hunted have already fallen. The pounding of her own heart is thundering in her head as she desperately wills it to quiet, fearing they will hear it as well. The woman peers from around the edge of the fallen log deep within the black of the rotted wood, feeling the not so thrilling slithering below her feet, desperately trying to calm her gasping breath. For she is sure the rider can hear her, since she seems to listen to the racing heartbeat as she hears thundering in her own ears. Her mouth is dry as sand, and the faint taste of blood from the wound in her mouth and face, as well as the metallic taste of some drug she vaguely remembers a man, maybe a woman, forcing into her mouth. She dares to peer through the crack of the dark wood. From back at the road, another dove's feather slowly lands on the surface of the puddle, displaying the reflection of the rider whose running horse suddenly springs through the mist and comes to halt, being seen again across the surface of this dark puddle. Again, vibrating the sounds across the surface. It is now presenting a mirror image of the darkness visible above, a demonic image of what dwells in the darkness of hell, as the rider turns his horse in anger and confusion, trying to decide what direction next he must charge. A small, screeching little man in a court jester's cloth, his horned hat with little bells on the tips hanging down around his overly large face like the legs of some green and orange spider, with the most hideous large smile, reins in one hand and a long curved sword flailing in the other. He suddenly kicks the horse forward and then pulls back, turning in circles, sitting as high as he can to try to look far off in the gloom, raising his horse cruelly while looking across the dark glade in his own perplexed confusion. His prey has suddenly disappeared. Two other riders gallop up from behind. Both men tower above the small court jester-dressed man, now looking at them with seething anger and contempt. One of the riders is carrying a long animal horn, and the other has a weapon staff with a dangling metal ball on a chain. Both of these riders wear dark black hooded robes tied at the waist with blood-red cords. The hood of one of the men has fallen back off his balding but long gray-haired head. His strong cleft chin, face, and eagle-like blue silver eyes leave no doubt that the man under the robe, while aged, is strong and focused, yet his eyes betray his docilely obedient face. "My lord," the large unhooded man says in reverence, "would you not prefer to hunt one of the other smaller children? That woman cannot get far, and this direction only leads into kilometers of thick brush. The only way back out there is the way she came from." With each word, the sounds ripple harshly across the surface, the reflection of the water, again cascading across the image, distorting ever so slightly the picture it reflects. For just a moment, demonic faces seem to appear across the face of the rider and across him as he mirrors in the pond, almost seeming through the splintered veil of reality which the sounds these creatures speak. The small, almost leprechaun-looking man in the green and yellow outfit turns back to the much larger man, his court-jester wide smile now replaced with a hateful anger, yet still smiling scowl. Those Judah vermin you like to hunt back there might be good enough for you, Herr Morte, but for blood royals, we only dine on purebloods. The jester pauses, showing his contempt. How you could have a mouth you have, mixing in a few of his Dutch royal heritage words just to accent the point, and then pointing the sword tip at the larger man. And do as you're told, or the next hunt will be serving you up for dinner with the rest of the lowborns. The jester reins in the horse quite aggressively around and started running up the dark path again, only after a pause with a silent yet affirming nod between the two hooded companions. They followed quickly after. The thundering hoofsteps spattered the mud as they disappeared down the now dark, misty path, and from view from the little dark water pond that now begins to calm down to quiet stillness. From the dark fallen log, the shivering woman watches their echoing charge as she silently peers at them departing from around the edge of the hollow tree trunk. Her arms desperately embrace her lacerated legs, trying to warm and still the shivering. She almost was sure they could hear, for her own heartbeat is still pounding in her ears. The thundering rhythm is like the booming distant drum, as hard as the knocking of her own knees. Silent, she commands her heart to slow, holding tight to her knees to calm them as well, and it does. How did I get here, she thinks to herself. That answer was not a mystery at all. She knew exactly and why she was here. She only had to blame herself. Stupid girl, how could you possibly think the Fuhrer would listen to you? Then the realization of the only real question. How in heaven am I going to get out of here? God, please help me. She turns her head towards the light at the end of the dark tunnel, an almost mystical brightness in the middle of the pitch black tunnel. It lights. So is the light of a single day. A body can only is there really any difference between images seen, felt, or hoped for in this physical universe, or compared to the realm of dreams when the maximum of stimulus can be experienced regardless of the particular makeup? It is only up to us to focus on the fraction of these infinite impulses and thus decide where our focus and thus our hearts will be. Chapter 2. The Dance of Light. All genius and creativity for that matter comes from the realm of the spirit. It is a realization of this truth that allows us to focus our heart's attention on heavenly places and see the light. And where the light or the heart is, there your treasures will be also. Exactly 50 years later, on the opposite side of the world, pitch black is the place where no light seems to find. Rare motions leave untattered thoughts battered behind. In no mercy swims demons, their black talons remain, to tear lives from the last whimpers of screams they refrain. Pitch black is the memories with the pains they display. Nowhere is under darkness with each tormentous day. Only the light of still waters tells her secrets from above. That life is still a wonder, with sweet breath, cool waters, and love. Pitch black, and the sounds of a young child's nervous breathing are heard desperately as she is trying to not even make a sound, at risk of her own breath giving away her presence to whatever evil lurks in the dark. The only sound that is heard is her own irregular breath, nervous, yet scarcely trying to even whisper and then desperately catching her breath in fear when she does. She holds her breath as she squirms closer to the thin blanket pressed against the corner of the cage. This cold, damp metal that is her world. This blanket and the small cloth doll, the only feeling of anything tender she has ever felt. Somehow she just knows it came from her mother. How she knows this, or even that she had a mother, except she does, perhaps, in her dreams. The sound of a single drop of water from the roof of the dungeon she lives in. It splatters onto the ground in the echoing sound that she has begun to just know occurs at precise time intervals in a regular pattern for as long as she can remember. These sounds come regularly as they announce she can almost feel the images of objects that surround them light up in her mind like a soft glow, suddenly illuminate them in the blackness of this place. Her own shivering can almost be heard in the silence as the metal cage she sits in vibrates by the same nervous shake. She can not herself stop. The blackness all around is engrossing, almost suffocating. Spirits move in and out of the shadows within the shadows, yet she knows she is alive. Her world is the limits of this cage she has always found herself in for as long as she can remember. If she had any contemplation of a coffin and suddenly waking up inside one, this would be it. Therein, dreams of another place, a place of light, can in itself be a curse, yet she knows it isn't. It's not always black. Sometimes the doors suddenly flash open, but that is always coupled with immediate horror from the demons that march in from the light. She knows they are demons because often in the dark shadows, the same demons fly past. Most leave her alone, as she has learned not to look at them, because if she does, they often turn and scream at her, even trying to bite at her at times. She's concentrating on her own irregular breathing again. Sounds calm her. Breath in a slightly soothing response. She hums in gratitude, only a single sound, and quickly hushes, remembering not to make a sound. Sounds attract hate. She knows this as early as she can remember. Don't cry. You only receive pain when you do. Children are brought in screaming between being beaten in front of her or worse, sometimes thrown into a momentary lit cages stacked around her, but most of the time dragged down the tunnels before her into the depths ahead until the doors finally close and darkness resumes. This always ends in a more horrific screams than silence. Another sound she knows as drops of water, one further away, far down the tunnels in the halls where they bring children somewhere close to the great stone altar that is there. Next to it stands this large image of a man with an animal's head. Sometimes there's a fire in his belly. This is not good. She holds her breath and sits completely still as long as she can, yet she cannot stop wringing her hands together in nervousness. Pitch black, and the sounds of the breathing soft starts again. Irregular, almost gasping as the child nervously tries desperately not to make even a sound of her own breathing seems to thunder across the loud as her heart. She sits in the cold black cage, pressed against the far corner, far from the door as she can manage. When the water is not dripping, the darkness is so completely quiet other than her own distinct, extremely young voice, even at barely a whisper as the breath again dares to leave her mouth. The fear she is obviously feeling betrays her gasps with just the slightest fearful sound at the end of each breath. A scream for mercy from a child voice echoing down the dark recesses of the maw of that is this world of darkness she lives. Sounds like a boy, immediately followed by angry hatred of one of the demons she knows all too well, the same ones that come, sometimes wearing their white coats, others in their hooded robes, occasionally the ones they call masters wearing bell-tipped hats. They are the cruelest, taking many of the children who are suddenly brought and placed crying in cages of their own, always screaming, and most never to return. This is the world she sees, hears, feels, tastes, even smells. It is her whole world. Yet people seem to come and go, demons just as many. Even though the longer she seems to be here, the less she's able to see them. Angels appear, sometimes blazing with light. One looks like the mother she knows from her dreams, but she too is coming less and less during the blackness, this black business the demons call day here. She hears them talk during the night, voices echoing when it's quiet, but mostly it's just nothing, black, cold. A drink of the water tube when she's thirsty, a bite of dry food they put in a tray when she's hungry. That is her world. Is it so different from many she remembered from her dreams? The drop was quiet a bit further. It seemed to bounce 3 times before the echo faded. She knows that what they do to those children deep down those tunnels. A few times she had to watch, being screamed at herself to keep her eyes open. Watching is imperative for the dark spirits to receive their due reward. She more than once heard a guard say to the demon in white coat that came. Yet she has learned to watch without seeing. If she could just listen without hearing, everything might be fine. With that last scream, the breath of the young child in the cage is suddenly and irregularly sped up as she tries desperately not to breathe, yet the fear is compelling her to do even more so. A sudden noise closing like a door or maybe a blow of a stick. She is terrified. Her eyes adjust only to the dimmest image which she can see in front of her. That familiar puddle that is collected in the tunnel, that is her life. She sits nervously with each shrilling sound. She wrings her hands more nervously, rubbing the cloth of that small white cloth doll she grabs nervously. It has been in her cage for as long as she can remember, forever. Almost no light now, just a simple breath as she expels across the bar that only the smallest space from her face. Her eyes adjust again and slowly after a bright light that blinds her when the hunchback came and took the screaming boy from the cage next to her only moments ago. It now seems ages ago. The puddle explodes with a ripple of waves as the water suddenly associated with that one sound deposits itself in the middle. She stares at it forever. Ever in the suddenly appeared in front of her. There's times when a complete quiet descends upon this place and the screaming has ceased. Even the handlers are gone or themselves descended into quiet rest. Only then does she sleep and escape into her dreams. The place were full of light, the same light that ripples on the puddles when the drop just filled them in. Other puddles have appeared further down the tunnel, each with its mirror of what she just can't see, and almost glimpse into the window of an entire world below, dancing with its own pictures of that place. The reflections give her glimpses around the corners or in the directions she just can't see herself yet know are there. Glimpses and sounds, sometimes felt with the breezes, even smells, the words or screams dance across the surface like dark spirits performing their own movements, cascading like the vibrations across her skin. Before the boy came to the cage next to her, the only words she knew were the faint sounds she would hear in the distance. With each scream, the movement on the waters that covered the ground would progress. Within the reflections, other waters, drops ripple as by their own ability in turn. The sounds into pulses of dim gray light. Sometimes she can see subtle yet distinct lips moving across the surface, telling their own stories, and even again speaking the memories of the pleas being desperately given. Numbers would appear. How she knew this she had no idea, yet she found herself constantly counting the rhythm between the drops, knowing during various times or the days or even the years how long to the precise moment when the next drop would come. A world of drops and screams, dark and demons, angels and dreams, cold, hunger, pain. It is her life she has been given. The thought that she might at any moment be taken down into that horrible darkness where only anger and screams of torment wait, haunts her like the dark shadow waiting just beyond her ability to perceive. So when the sounds of screams occur, she cannot sleep. Yet for some reason, what happens to the other children never happens to her. Once in her faraway dream, she saw a dark spirit come for her, but it seemed to be pushed away, screaming itself, when it was denied access to her. She knows God is there, even though memories of him are fading. She asks for him for help, and she is thankful she has the water in the tube to drink or the cracker to eat. Again in the darkness makes a sinister creak in the distance, and her thoughts are back to her breathing as she holds her breath and tries not to move as the sound fades into the dark. Thank you. She always has felt angel wings stir on the waters as they bring God's responding tears into the waters of her pleas. She just seems to know that the drops in the water are his tears. Sometimes she can feel the faint water droplets touch her skin as they bathe her clean, mostly as she just starts to sleep or begins to wake. Men's voices often talk as doors open and close in the business that is her days, most of the time accompanied crying, often screaming, but only when the demons come. The one they call the doctor or the hunchback. Sometimes the sudden slamming or yelling sounds end, replaced by softer humming, sounds far off in the distance, words often at night as the guards talk far off in what they call night. In the stillness of this place, it is then she finally gets to sleep. It is here she dreams as she listens to the drops, and maybe between the gentle hum of the world and the softly glides off again into heaven, the place she thanks God for the life she has been given and the moments of rest as she remembers the softness against her face as she sleeps. She can hear voices almost everywhere, even in the shadows, good and bad. That's something new. The small child thinks to herself, only moments distracted from the horrors she hears. She can see light form around the bars in front of her face as she breathes onto the bars, and the dampness outlines the squares perfectly, then disappears. The girl breathes again against the bars and sits watching the droplets that again form on the cage before her face. She softly starts to see the outline of the bars as her face adjusts and her eyes start to see to the near pitch blackness that the tunnel in front of her. The puddle already calm from the thunderous drop moments before. A gift from God. Thank you. The descending corridor, a mirror reflection of black on black, with the few empty hallways that lead to the stone altar at the end. Add to them the voices of the recesses of the facility she is imprisoned. Every sound creates itself, again, images in her mind. Not only do what they are talking about, but the objects around them, painting a complete picture of light that marks the edges of her world, the world limited by this place, yet not a whole world, for she's dreamed of a place full of light. She sees the slight shimmer of the water on the bars for just a moment, as the sound of the droplets seems to dance its way across. Lights from nowhere ripple like water across the puddle, and with its shimmers on the bars like the lights of her dreams. It is so beautiful, thank you, God. Voices carry across the water puddles too, forming ripples, but they are just shades of light or darkness with reflection of movements deep down the throat of this hell. They form on the surface of the floor along a long corridor of the walls of this world. She hears the guards, the handlers they call themselves, sometimes talking far away. Yet in the stillness, especially after the demons leave, their voices are clear. She listens, learns, and knows what they say. She always just seems to know. The child comes and goes with pain. The children come and go with pain. She sees to herself the handlers call them sheep, most small and screaming when they arrive, but the hunchbacked or the white coated demon quickly puts a stop to that. With the shock sticks they hit the cages with. The cruelty seems so unnecessary. Everyone cries when they're scared, and she has learned not to. That too, of course, when they are being kind. On a more than one occasion, the leading demon, Dr. Damien, has pulled small children from the cage right in front of her and beaten them to death. Many times, then he seems fearful himself. At least this is what she has heard the doctor say, as often speaks with regret, especially when the robed ones come, being yelled at by them himself. Fear is then in his voice. She is rubbing the small white cloth doll now between her hands again. Her breath escaped again. Fear has taken hold of her irregular gasps again as she hears soft screams in the distance, and with them dark ripples forming on the water. Sometimes the fear seems to be all around her, and no matter which way she turns, its biting teeth or tearing claws await. Thankfully, thankfully she has her doll to hold. She knows it was from her mother. How she knows this is but a dream, but she knows. Softly she hums to herself in a desperate attempt to drown out the sound, at least in her own ears, and suddenly she sees that with her one sound, she ripples light across the surface, and the darkness is suddenly stilled. Astonished at this discovery, she does it again, and with the same result. She repeats the sound again in silence, even though she started to hear and what started to be more screams. Do not hum too loud, because if the demons might hear, she thinks to herself. The last time she made a sound, a demon turned out of the darkness and shocked her cage. That pain and torment caused her to be sick for many days, as she could hardly reach the water straw to drink. It was one of the few days she actually asked God to let her die. The young child's voice is suddenly silent, as well, even her humming, every sound except the return of the nervous gasping and irregular breath, as well as the wringing of her hands. Now the doll is discarded into the corner, and her hands rubbing each other in nervous comfort. The last echoing sound, a few moaning ripples across the droplets of the cage, as the little girl suddenly holds her breath in silence that seems to last forever. Suddenly, without any noise, light shines from behind her, and for the first time clearly, we can see the young girl, maybe 2 or 3 in size, sitting in a cage back to the furthest corner. With her back to the door, her long brown hair drapes across her back, signs of more than one shock to her back evident on the unwashed but tender white skin. As the light comes in from behind her, she suddenly turns, first in fear, her eyes wide and mouth poised to scream, fearful of the possibility of being caught humming. But just as quickly as she turns, a smile crosses her face as she seems to recognize who's in the light. She smiles with the sweetest, loving smile, uttering a soft, happy sound out loud, relaxing her tense posture as the glimmer in her eyes sparkles with the brightness of 1,000 diamonds. In the reflection, we can see stepping out of the light is a figure of bearded man with long red-brown hair and the gentlest smile anybody has ever seen in any life. The sympathy in his eyes fills the entire existence with love and the knowledge everything is going to be all right. She smiles as she recognizes his face. Reaching behind her, she pulls something out from behind her and holds out the white, weathered doll as a gift to him, the only thing she has. In the reflection of her eyes, he smiles. I will read chapter 3 tomorrow. Bless you. This is the Hooded Vigilante, reading Hunting Fields by Dr. Peter Colla.